Welcome everybody, we are going to listen to what the Discourse on Games Criticism has to say on fighting games, and just trying to find some good articles. A few ones that'll get us started in our discussion this week. Let me type in. Six Way Street Fighter V tries to reinvent the franchise. He wrote an article, Patrick Miller wrote an article called 17 Mold-Breaking Fighting Games that developers should study. So that sounds like something we should, pay attention to. Why are there so many duplicates on this? Oh, so Patrick Miller, who's also called Pat the Flip, he writes a lot about fighting games. He has an article, or it's a short video here, Diversity in Fighting Game Community, the Physicality of Button Execution, the Value of Fighting Game Tournaments. Little blurbs here that are easy to watch. He has this article here, Street Fighter V. He has more little snippets here, Conventions in Fighting Games and Character Control in Fighting Games. So we'll be tuning into a lot of what Patrick Miller has to say, just to get our feet wet. Let me type in his full name. Let's change this to silver, because we're just starting out on design and we want to be pretty general. This is story. This is design. That's story. As you can see here, Patrick has written a lot. He wrote something a long time ago. Oh, Street Fighter, a fighting game primer for everyone. Maybe that's what we'll start. Why not? Oh, this looks pretty long. Jeez. This is a huge fighting game primer. Let's take it chunk by chunk. There we go.
Never too late to learn how to play Street Fighter in Patrick Miller's new book, From Masher to Master. The educated video game enthusiast's fighting game primer. He helpfully breaks down the genre's basic concepts and game theory into an easily digestible read. Even if you haven't seriously played a fighting game since Street Fighter II Albert defined the genre more than 20 years ago. With some help from fellow fighting game enthusiasts, like Skullgirls developer Mike Zymot, Seth Killian and other fighting game community veterans, Miller explains concepts like mix-ups and cross-ups, chains and combos, footsies and reversals, and much more. Whether you want to have a better understanding of how to play fighting games or just want to feel smarter during this weekend's EVA Fighting Game Championships, it's worth a fun, informative read. We're publishing a slightly abridged version of the book's first chapter with Miller's permission. The full book is available to download for free in PDF format at shoryuken.com. Versions formatted for ebook readers are forthcoming, Miller said. Chapter 1. Everything you need to know about fighting games. Street Fighter 2 is intimidating, understandably so. Any given character has somewhere between 18-24 different normal moves coming from 6 buttons, 3 punch buttons and 3 kick buttons that each perform different attacks depending on whether your character is standing, crouching, jumping up, or jumping forward backward. A few throws, special moves, maybe even a super or two. At any given moment in Street Fighter 2, I could conceivably perform upwards of 35-40 different actions. As such, the most useful thing a novice can do is simplify the game. If you learn to think of Street Fighter 2 as a series of predictable situations with optimal solutions, you can forget the 34 dumb choices in any given situation and focus on executing the 1 or 2 good choices. In rather broad strokes, fighting games are about imposing your will on your opponent. Your goal is to make a series of intelligent situations that constrict your opponent's options, forcing them to make ever more dangerous gambles until they do something you can punish them for. You want to put your opponent in these situations over and over until they lose, and then you put them in these situations again and again until they don't want to play with you anymore. Basically, you're making the game as tortuous and awful as possible for your opponent while they try to do the same to you. It's a beautiful thing. To begin, fighting games are about making your opponent's character lose his life before your character loses hers. Characters in fighting games take damage when you hit them. A hit happens when one character presses a button to perform an attack, and that attack connects with the other character's body. These moves are usually different kinds of punches, kicks, and throws, but they range into more exotic stuff like flying uppercuts and fireballs. While you may be seeing punches and kicks, however, the game itself is just seeing different kinds of boxes moving around. When you hit your opponent with an attack, the game sees your character creating a box that does damage, hitbox, overlapping with an area occupied by a box that belongs to another character, hurtbox. In Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, you can actually turn on a view mode that shows hitboxes and hurtboxes. Press medium kick while Ryu is crouching, and you'll see a red box around his leg. You can see that when you use your normal moves, your character winds up a little bit in the start of the attack, then the hitbox shows up. If your box hits someone, they take damage and are sent into a hitstun state for a little while, during which they cannot move, attack, or block. If your opponent's hitbox comes into contact with you either before your hitboxes show up, after your hitbox disappears, or manages to connect with your character's hurtboxes while cleanly avoiding your attack, then you'll get it instead. If your hitbox hits someone while they're blocking, then they'll be sent into a block stun state, where they won't be able to move or attack but take no damage, unless your attack is a special move, in which case they'll take a little damage for blocking it. Each attack consists of 3 phases. Startup, which is the part of the animation before you project the hitbox. Active, which is when your attack projects a hitbox. And recovery, which is after your hitbox is gone, and the move winds down. This diagram illustrates the length of each phase of Ryu's standing heavy kick. When you're just starting out with a new character, one of your first steps is to understand each move's advantages and trade-offs in order to find out which moves are good in different situations. If a move has a really short startup animation, that means you can use it to stop slower attacks before they start and put your opponent under pressure. Conversely, if a move has a slow startup animation, you'll have to be more careful about how or when you use it. If a move stuns your enemy for a long time when you hit them with it, you can use it to start combos and do heavy damage to your opponent. If it hits, or use it to keep your opponent blocking and make it hard for them to start attacking you. If a move doesn't stun your enemy for so long, your opponent might have the opportunity to hit you after blocking it, meaning you should only use that move when you're absolutely sure it'll hit. Some moves cover the area above your character's head, so they're good for hitting enemies that jump at you. Moves that extend far across the screen are good for keeping your enemy at range. And so on. Note that every move in the game has an advantage and a disadvantage, depending on the situation it's used in. That doesn't mean all moves are equally good. There are some moves that are pretty useless, or highly situational, and part of learning a fighting game is figuring out which ones are which. And remember, no matter how cool, or not cool, any given move may look, to the game it's just a different kind of box, so don't pay too much attention to how painful or flashy something looks. Often, the coalesced-looking moves are the ones you want to use sparingly. Individual moves are the atomic unit of composition for a fighting game, but eventually your understanding of fighting games will grow to include effective combinations of moves that can work together to mask each other's weaknesses and synergize with each other's strengths in ways that encourage certain styles of play. But before we start understanding different styles of play, we should understand the basic character archetype from which all others are defined. Ryu, the atom of fighting games. Ryu vs. Ryu is the character that the entire genre of fighting games was designed around. Every fighting game, from King of Fighters to Guilty Gear to Marvel vs. Capcom to Tekken, can trace its design history back right to Ryu. So let's break Ryu down? And in doing so, break down pretty much every fighting game ever. As it happens, pretty much everything you need to know about modern fighting games is right here in this exchange. We're going to dissect this in depth, so go ahead and watch it a few times. And don't worry if you can't do all the moves with the precision or timing that you see in this video. We're going to start by analyzing the game flow, and get to the physical execution part later in this book. Also, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Fighting games are, at their most basic level, really fancy versions of rock, paper, scissors. Any given move in a fighting game is defined in part by what it wins against, what it loses against, and what it draws even against. As you go through this next section, try to think about what each player is doing, and when those actions would win, lose, or draw. Now, let's start with phase 1. Orange throws a fireball, blue jumps over it. Orange hits blue with the dragon punch. Ryu's Fireball and Dragon Punch are two attacks that are so interesting they basically defined a major chunk of the fighting game genre. The Fireball has a fairly high amount of startup time before it turns into a hurtbox. Once it is out, Ryu has to wait for a little bit before he can move freely, and then he can move and attack at will, depending on which punch button the Ryu player uses to perform the Fireball. The Fireball's hitbox could be only halfway across the screen or almost all the way across, by the time he recovers. Once Ryu recovers from throwing the Fireball, he basically has the ground half of the screen covered. This Fireball leaves his opponent with the following options. Get hit by it, leaving him in a short amount of stun and taking a bit of damage. Block it, so he takes less stun and damage amount of damage. Respond with a Fireball of his own to cancel it out, so neither player takes stun or damage. Jump over it, avoiding the Fireball entirely and opening up an opportunity for a counterattack. Essentially, throwing a Fireball means putting yourself at risk in the immediate moment by performing an attack with a long startup period in order to gain an advantage once it's out and covering a whole bunch of screen space. So Orange threw a Fireball at Blue. How is Blue supposed to find the best option available to him? Well, we'll start by looking for the ideal outcome. Blue wants to avoid taking damage or being stunned. That means that player 2 can either respond with a Fireball to cancel out player 1's Fireball, or jump over it to avoid it completely. Now, at the beginning of phase 1, Blue is standing about 1/2 to 2/3 of a screen length away from Orange. At this range, it would probably take Blue too much time to realize that Orange is throwing a Fireball. Blue decide to throw a Fireball, and successfully execute the Fireball motion in order to cancel the first Fireball out. If Blue tried to throw a Fireball, he'd probably end up getting hit by the first Fireball before his own Fireball had arrived on screen, or maybe he'd successfully cancel it, but would still be a little bit behind Orange, because Blue started his Fireball after Orange did, meaning Blue will recover after Orange, which leaves Orange with time to follow the Fireball up with something else, like walking up to Blue and hitting him, or throwing another Fireball. So Blue decides to jump at Orange and hit him with a jumping kick. Unfortunately, this is where the second interesting move in fighting games comes in. The Dragon Punch. The Dragon Punch is basically the anti-Fireball, where the Fireball sacrifices the present for the future. The DP borrows against the future in favor of right now. Upon completing the DP motion, Orange is invincible for the beginning of the move. Within a fraction of a second, he absolutely owns the space occupied around his fist. Once Orange hits Blue with the Dragon Punch, he knocks Blue into the air and sends him into a knockdown state, where he can't do anything until he gets back up off the ground. Of course, the DP has plenty of recovery time. If Orange didn't hit Blue cleanly with it, then Blue could have punished Orange when he came back down to the ground. The Dragon Punch is the great momentum breaker. Its near instant activation time and ultimate priority mean that, basically, if you know that your opponent is going to do something, you can beat it with the Dragon Punch. Your opponent can keep you pummeled under a barrage of fireballs and well-timed moves designed to keep you blocking, but one properly timed Dragon Punch will reverse the momentum entirely and put you back in the game. However, if you miss a Dragon Punch, you might well lose the game. High risk, high reward. So, to recap phase 1. Orange throws a Fireball. Blue reacts by trying to jump over the Fireball and gets it with the Dragon Punch, sending Blue down to the ground, where he'll have to wait for a second or two to stand back up before he can do anything.
This video is a little bit, or this article seems to be a little bit, it would benefit a lot more from having a video explain everything and better diagrams than using words for all this stuff and talking about orange and blues and what they could have or would have done. Like, fighting games are so effective at showing things that I don't know how you should or would get away from describing how they work without using visuals, like, all the time. I mean, that's what video games are generally really good at, so in so many words, trying to describe everything in words doesn't seem like a good idea. Footsie generally refers to a certain phase in a fighting game where master will players are dancing in and out of sweep range, trying to land a knockdown and get the match momentum in their favor. It's kind of a nebulous term with no 100% clear definition, but in general, when you hear that someone is good at footsie, it usually means they're good at winning exchanges in the neutral game, which is a key for seizing control in the match. It's funny. A lot of people always try to cop to the fact that things don't have clear definitions because they either, one, didn't look them up, or two, didn't bother to sort of synthesize how the word started and how it's currently used and what's the best way to use it. I mean, you can just kind of take a look at all the different ways people say footsies and then look at the underlying design reasons why they exist and why they don't exist and come up with a pretty good reason, definition. But, you know, that's just an issue of finding the right word for the concept when at least you have the concept for it. Yeah, let me know in the chat if you have any questions about fighting game specific things. I mean, we have this cool topic wheel to help us also. That's kind of cool. This will be going live on our site pretty soon, but for now I'll use it as a visual aid and element. Earlier today we looked at Super Smash Brothers, Bari Ball, and Samurai Gun, talking about, you know, what makes up the essence of fighting games, and we're just kind of learning the basics before we get into why they're so complicated and why people have such a hard time talking about them. Let's see. Let's look at this one, because this one will probably be better.
One thing you've got to realize is, first off, a fighting game gives you far deeper control over your character than I'd say just about any other genre of game out there, right? If I want to master Ryu in Street Fighter 4, he has, I believe, about 30 to 40 different moves. I have 6 buttons and an 8-way joystick that I can use to input all those moves, plus different combinations of those buttons as well. So at any given moment, I can be performing all kinds of different actions, and the range is such that it's much, much easier for, once you get past a certain level of ability, no two characters will really, truly look 100% identical, right? Some of that is just in the physicality of it, right? It's in the way you control yourself. It's in the pacing and the spacing, the timing, the tempo, right? I should interject here, I'm also like an actual martial artist. I've been boxing and doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for almost as long as I've been playing Street Fighter. And the two really have parallels in that respect. Just like no two boxers throw the same jab. Even though all my attacks are the same with Ryu, my Ryu is going to look very different from, say, Daigo Umehara's, because part of it is just because we execute it differently. We have different rhythms to the way we like to attack or the way we like to defend.
It's a very tiny video here, but it seems like all of them are only going to scratch the surface at the topic and not really dig deeply into it. That's a shame, because those are some interesting topics. I mean, I honestly don't know how much you can say in a minute and a half about any of these complex topics. But at least we're getting a little bit closer to understanding what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the week. Character control in fighting games. I don't know why he's trying to make that particular argument, but you know, it's all a case of, you know, nuance, complexity, and, you know, relative understanding, right? To an outsider, multiple fighting games look the same. It's just people throwing punches and kicks and jumping at each other. But for people who know the individual games, the individual punches and kicks look different, they work differently, and then you can see sort of the ins and outs of why a player would use those punches and kicks at those particular ranges. It gets even more and more specific when you know more and more about the game. You know, you get to see the individual timing differences and spacing differences that individual players will use to get the job done, beside the fact that some players win and some lose, like on a micro scale, moment to moment. How they move and how that reflects sort of how they think about the fighting game at that moment. But you know, that's usually something you can do with just about any game. You play enough, when you do enough moves, you just do enough inside the game system, and you get to start this differentiation to occur. It won't occur on the very first move, most likely, but the more moves you do, you will gradually reveal the history of your particular viewpoint. And, you know, like in chess or anything like that, the more moves you do, the more you reveal how good or bad you are, how much you know. So, yeah, for real-time games, it's different. The exact timing that you throw out your punches and kicks and things like that, you know, it's a big deal. That changes things. So let me just stretch this out a little bit. And that kind of matters, right? Down to a frame. Putting a gap of one frame between one move and another is a big deal. Conceptually, can have huge results and net you benefits. And if you can both perceive the timing differences on that scale and input it on that scale, and you're just playing on a whole nother level, a more precise level. People often talk about fighting games as, oh, he's on another level, he's like just completely outclassing this guy, but a lot of times it's really zooming in to the same game and just being more precise about the things and the same tools that everybody's using. That's cool. But let's listen to this one.
When I'm playing a competitive card game, right, like Pokemon, Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, whatever, there's no way in which my body's coordination is going to influence that game, and that's something that I love about the way fighting games play. I think my favorite, and this becomes a game design tool that you can utilize as well. So most people know the input for the Dragon Punch, right? Kenryu's Shoryuken. It's forward, down, forward, and punch. It's kind of an awkward Z motion. And if you think about it, it's complicated because if you're performing it on an arcade stick or even on a gamepad, you have to move your hands 1, 2, 3 times, right? Whereas the fireball, which is one of the more simple motions, just down, forward, and punch, is just it's a simple, uncomplicated sweep. Right, so I start by moving my hand down and then roll it to the right. The Dragon Punch, you have to go forward, back, forward, basically, and so that adds a level of complication, right? Even though the Dragon Punch in game is a move that is executed instantly, right? The moment you finish that input, you start doing the Dragon Punch. The effort required to perform the move on the arcade stick or on the gamepad adds an extra, fraction of a second. Right, so it's harder to perform a Dragon Punch on reaction than it is some other special moves. Right, adding complexity to the motions in that respect is a design tool that you can balance around. Right, you can give characters super powerful moves that are just a little bit more complicated to perform flawlessly on time, and that becomes another element of the character's difficulty and learning curve. That doesn't mean it needs to be tied to a particular input device, mind you. But I think that the physicality of execution is absolutely a critical part of a fighting game.
Hey, Lesson Pie, what's going on? We're just doing our primer for fighting games, so like, it's right up your alley, obviously being a Smash Bros. Fan and player. Just taking a look at what is a fighting game and what design elements are important for getting fighting game gameplay to shine. What is fighting game gameplay? Like, we gotta hit a lot of topics just on this first day, just to get our feet wet before we jump into anything else. So right now we're just listening to Patrick Miller, who's goes by Pat the Flip in the Smash community, sort of was a Melee player. I got to meet him at GDC. He wrote some of these pretty interesting articles. He obviously knows what he's talking about. He wrote a little ebook. He plays fighting games. He's working on a fighting game. I think it was part of Rising Thunder, and now he's working on a new project. So definitely he has some interesting points of view to consider. So we're just looking at some of the videos he's put out here. I've never heard of him. He know that I talking about the oh no. Let's listen to this.
Look at a strict genre definition. Fighting games typically rely on conventions like one-on-one combat, usually of the kind of melee variety, right? Like sometimes weapons are involved or hand-to-hand. Usually you have life bars that represent a character's health, right? Like it's a rough approximation of a boxing or mixed martial arts match, and it's usually stylized in a sense, right? Like maybe it's samurai, maybe it's like street fighting, whatever. But I think the core elements of a fighting game involve a combination of kind of physical dexterity, right? Your ability to master the physical inputs required to create the outputs you're looking for. And then a fundamental like mind clash between two players, right? So I have like my body and my practice and the character or characters that I choose give me this set of options, and I'm using these tools or these options to best your tools and options, right? So it's like I would describe it as like speed poker, chess, rock, paper, scissors. That to me is a fighting game. And so in that respect, like, yes, Street Fighter and its ilk, that's the most traditional example of a fighting game that we see in the industry right now.
I don't know why this series likes to cut off these guys like abruptly and awkwardly, but okay, at least he gave us something to talk about here. It's funny how people seem to have such an awkward time defining what a fighting game is, and they'll often use sort of other games like speed, chess, poker, rock, paper, scissors, which is completely unnecessary to complicate things. I mean, earlier today we broke it down to these 4 key characteristics, right, to create fighting game gameplay, right? And we don't really care about convention. We don't really care about Street Fighter and its sort of the granddaddy and how it started things off. We don't really worry about all that stuff. But you can see here at the bottom, real time. Fighting game has to be in real time, and this is pretty. It's obvious that we know what this means, but you could probably get away with some semi-turn-based stuff, some simultaneous turn stuff. You can stretch it. I mean, time is pretty flexible, but the real-time aspect is pretty important, and it plays into the whole timing and spacing thing. But for now, we'll just say like real time's important. It needs to have dynamic space, and I could have called this something else like continuous space, simulated space, or whatever, but essentially you've got to have enough space to properly define some of these fighting mechanics that we'll get to in a second. So if you're just on a 2x1 grid where there's just 2 gigantic squares and both players take up 1 square each, there's not enough space between them to have a fight, right? And if you have a grid-based existence, I don't know what kind of a real-time games on a grid like this, but if you just imagine, that'd be kind of weird. Maybe you could get it to work. For the most part, you just need enough space, and really in video games how we give players enough space to throw out punches and kicks and play around in is we just make it by the pixel, right? Continuous space. So there's lots of tiny a very small subdivision in order to accurately define how much space you got to play in. We talked about you have characters with attacks. Like, yeah, we don't play fighting games with disembodied people. I'm not even sure what that would entail, right? The whole point of a fighting game is to attack the person that's attacking you. So the reason why that's so dynamic is the target that you're trying to hit is not only attacking you back, but while it attacks at the same time that you're attacking, it's changing its shape. So like if it goes low and you punch high or jump, that's a different shape that you're attacking and trying to hit as you're trying to hit it, and these things happen simultaneously. That's super dynamic. And that almost takes care of all of what we need to but mostly define this genre. And then the last one I think is and by the attacks, mostly melee attacks. You can create a fighting game gameplay with projectile attacks, but you'd probably have to define them very differently than how a lot of action games do it, like Virtual Ontario Tangram and other mech fighters. Like, those are real-time action games, but they're not fighting games, even if they're in 1v1 arena style setups. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but to get some of the same emergent gameplay dynamics to happen, you'd have to design your projectiles to be very different than what you're normally seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off the table for now. And the last one, the primary interplay of Imagine Battle Network's battle system as a fighting game, it can still work with grids. Mega Man Battle Network. Let's see. I'm gonna just type in. I'm gonna type in Battle Network. See what we get in Dio. So, I mean, Lesson Pie says, imagine Mega Man Battle Networks in a fighting game, as a system, as a fighting game, it could still work with grids. I mean, maybe, maybe not. So, Mega Man Battle Network, if a screenshot will ever pull itself up. Oh, cool, we got screenshots. This is what Mega Man Battle Network kind of looks like. I can't believe there's no articles about Mega Man Battle Network, jeez. So, as you can see here, see how Mega Man moves in only on the squares that he's standing in, and you can shoot at enemies. They move in real time, but as long as they're lined up on the grid and you're on the same line, you can shoot them and it hurts them. You can charge up your buster, or you can occasionally use these super moves, these special moves, these chips, and deal more damage if you can line it up and time it and space it right. So this is a really neat real-time action RPG system. Like, it's a really cool idea. I was really impressed when I first played the first one, but I haven't played any other Mega Man Battle Network games. But that gives you a taste of what Lesson Pie's talking about. He's saying this system could work as a fighting game. So what we're talking about here with the criteria down at the bottom is that you need characters with melee attacks. And in the whole dynamic thing that I just described is that the shape of your body, which is the target for your other player, changes as you attack and as you move. So that's a really dynamic thing going on. And if you have this Mega Man Battle Network system, I'm not sure how your whole body's on a square. So like, I'm not sure how you moving your body to attack into a whole other square could create that dynamic relationship of the two dual simultaneously attacking players attacking and defending each other at the same time to dynamically change the targets on each other. I mean, maybe in a little way it would work, but we're kind of like saying fighting games are distinct because they focus on this kind of style of play entirely. And as you can see on the next point here down at the bottom, the primary interplay of a fighting game is designed and revolves around spacing to create double blind encounters. And double blind is essentially saying that the mechanics and the options are designed so that distinct pros and cons are available and realized when both players input certain actions at the same time. So the windows for attacks a lot of times won't be one that you can easily react to and then do whatever you want like you often do in a single player. It's if you think that person's got to do this at a specific time, you need to do your thing at the same time, on time, right? That's what we mean by double blind. Battle systems like Pokemon and poker operate on blindness and Pokemon on double blind, but fighting games do it in real time and they focus entirely on it. So oftentimes you can't get advantages unless you throw yourself out there and pick a move and go for it. That means you simultaneously open yourself up for counterattack like rock, paper, scissors. And that's why people often talk about rock, paper, scissors as a in fighting game terms, but it's really a lot more complicated than that. So, you know, take that as you will. So, though, Path to Flip, Patrick Miller, that's enough of you, Mega Man. Patrick Miller talked about fighting games as being a dexterity element and a mind clash between players. That's an odd way of trying to get at the essence of the genre, because you could pretty much say this is the case for, you know, speed chess. You can say this is the case for competitive first-person shooters. You can say this is the case for real-time strategy games. I mean, what video game that has any kind of strategy is in a clash between players' minds? And maybe he means like more than just the skill and knowledge you have of the system, kind of like Guitar Hero, where it's really not a clash of your minds, but if you play competitive Guitar Hero, you just go for score and you try to hit your all your points perfectly when the time comes. So like that's not a clash of the minds between each other. That's just a test to see how well you've done your practice previously. But still, in a lot of multiplayer games, a lot of esports, a lot of head-to-head games, you understanding your opponent's tendencies and capitalizing on those is a big part of it. Fighting games more so, but these two ways of describing fighting games alone I don't feel are adequate. And here's the weird part about the physical dexterity. That hardly matters. And whenever you have a real-time game, right, I'm going to highlight it here, whenever you have a real-time game and you give players these options like jabs and stuff in fighting games that, you know, start up in a few frames, a few 60th of a second, and wrap up in about 20 or so frames. You can do 3 decisions per second. And if you're trying to think about in real time the implications of your moves that you're inputting maybe 3 times a second, and trying to watch out for what your opponent is also inputting 3 times a second, and then making new decisions based on all that's happening, that level of speed that's common to real-time action games and mini fighting games is going to push the dexterity skill ceiling way up. So in other words, it doesn't take much for a fighting game to stress clean inputs and create a ceiling where you're pushing a lot of buttons accurately is a valued thing. So you don't have to call it out specifically when you're talking about what's the essence of a fighting game. You just throw real time in it and it's going to get pretty intense. I mean, I played a lot of different kind of weird fighting games, and the level of control they give you is pretty amazing. Just to be able to time various amounts of or various attacks with various timings by hitting the button right when you want it, that's a lot of control, but then your movement is usually pretty crispy or pretty complex, like Smash Brothers or even Monkey Fight 2 for GameCube, right? These games that a lot of people don't think are fighting games, but they fulfill this criteria and they do well because of it. I also wanted to talk about Wii Sports Boxing, but I might show that later on stream. That's a really interesting case to look at. But yeah, like, so many things are not important to focus on when talking about what the essence of a fighting game is. And the reason that I focus on these things, I tried to get the list as short as possible, as compact as possible. I also tried to make it to where you don't need to rely on the history of fighting games in order to extract these core essence. And then I also wanted it to tie into the same kinds of language that we talk about other games, because in a lot of ways fighting games are distinct and different, but they're not that different from so many other video games. And I think a lot of people trip up when they say like, oh, fighting games are like these other shooters and stuff, and like, yeah, they're similar because they're all action games, they're all played in real time, but these distinct differences are so important to focus on, to know that they come from these 4 pieces alone that shape just about everything else that you feel like is very different and distinct about fighting games. Is an important design realization to come to. So let's look at, I want to look at this. 6 ways Street Fighter V tries to reinvent the franchise. Paid updates versus pay once, okay. New player experience, easier but still hard, okay. Core game design, less deep but in a good way. I want to look at this part right here.
Fighting games before Street Fighter IV were a lasagna of esoteric systems and characters that made sense only if you had played the games prior. SF4 brought the sheer volume of stuff in the game down considerably, but there was still a lot of work just to get competitive with a single character. De-emphasizing execution as a defining component of mastery doesn't just bring down the barrier to entry, it makes losing a little bit less frustrating. Mastering a character meant being able to execute many difficult combos and setups, studying how to exploit engine quirks that led to unlockable attacks and input buffer glitches that let you input several moves in quick succession to get the optimal outcome, option selects, and learn how your character played against every other single character. So while there was less stuff in the game, there was enough stuff to learn in a single character that most dedicated players rarely expanded. They're stable past a main character and perhaps 1 or 2 backups. Even reaching basic proficiency in SF4 required a lot of work for new players. For example, A lot of an SF4 character's power isn't unlocked until you're able to consistently combo into their Ultra, which often requires you land a normal hit, cancel it into a special move, cancel the special move into a focus attack, cancel the focus attack into a dash, and perform the Ultra input at the end of the dash. That's a lot of work for what you'd think should be a pretty important basic part of a character's kit. In Street Fighter V, it feels, so far, like less of a character's power is connected to physical execution or mastery of obtuse mechanics than ever before. That isn't to say that there aren't exploits and techniques that exist in the game, some of which Capcom will likely patch out, while others will remain, but overall, it feels like the game was designed specifically to make any given character's toolset fully accessible to a moderately competent fighting game player. This means that skill and mastery in SF5 is less about technical excellence and execution and more about studying your character matchups, adapting to your opponents, and diversifying your character pool beyond a single main character. I estimate that a technically sound player who understands the core systems can start playing a new character in training mode, learn their basic tools, and start playing against other sound players within half an hour. In SF4, that's long enough to learn their basic moveset and start practicing some of their basic combos. Think of it this way: if you're playing fighting games without a basic literacy of what each character's move is, and how they interact with yours, you're playing chess before learning what each piece does. Competing at Wokuno's lore pieces is less interesting than competing at Wokuno's surveil pieces of TTER, and as Street Fighter V tries to make the pieces fewer in number and more understandable, it makes it easier for people who aren't professional players to eventually get to play the real game over learning the moves. De-emphasizing execution as a defining component of mastery doesn't just bring down the barrier to entry, it makes losing a little bit less frustrating. Losing because your opponent was able to perform their combos better than you is fundamentally dissatisfying to many new fighting game players because it's not a skill most people want to practice. SF5 does a better job making you feel like you lost because they were better at hitting you, not because they were better at hitting buttons. From very early on in the beta, veteran fighting game players noted that the game emphasizes skill at footsies, essentially a player's ability to consistently connect a clean lead while avoiding your opponent's attacks, while SF4 was often criticized for making it too hard to recover after getting knocked down, making it feel like at high levels around could end with a single sweep or throw.
That's interesting then. So much talk of what we're going to hear this week is about execution, and people talking about how the way that some of these games are designed create barriers for people to enjoying the game, and in a lot of ways it's just going to be a lot of excuses, but in a lot of ways those excuses are real because real players are either picking up the game or dropping it, and it's shaping like actually how the game's turning out. So that's interesting. I think a lot of times people just they make excuses for the type of things they don't want to learn that doesn't come naturally to them. I don't know why people think that being good is ever natural. Like, most people are not good, and you know this just from thinking. And it sucks to lose in ways that you don't feel like you need to practice or want to acknowledge. So like Patrick Miller was saying in the article, a lot of people just don't feel like practicing combos. They don't feel like the dexterity element should be in the game. It should be in their way. But regardless of if that's a good way to think or not, you lose because of all those reasons. Every single reason, including the stuff you wanted to ignore. You weren't good enough in a lot of different dimensions. And I always say, like, you could probably zoom in a year from now, and if you kept playing the game, you could probably come back and like beat someone with just the most basic button inputs because your knowledge is so far beyond than what you have now. So there's lots of ways to think about barriers, but in a very real sense, if you were smarter, you wouldn't have to complain about execution. If you had cleaner inputs, you wouldn't have to worry about how little you understand of the moves and the knowledge of the moves that are coming at you. And if you could race ahead in any particular aspect of what makes fighting games great, you could probably beat just about everyone. But because you can't, and you're kind of tied into the same sort of race that everyone else is, as we all gain knowledge sort of at the same rate, then that kind of highlights that any excuse you make is a big reason to hold you back. And that's kind of hard to swallow for a lot of people. It's not the little things that hold you back, it's all the little things. Yeah, and like, but I think for most of the people, there's all these different sort of comments and complaints that cover across the board. High-level players talking about things that aren't necessary or whatever. Low-level players that are complaining. So no matter what, if it's in the game, it's going to affect everyone, and people can see it differently and make excuses, buckle down or whatever, practice, find better ways to train, so on and so forth. And like I said before, though, these high execution barriers aren't barriers. It's all relative to the metagame, right? And if you could, like, especially the beginning of a game's life, like the beginning of Street Fighter 4, the beginning of Smash 4, beginning of Street Fighter 5, you could just somehow, like, go into a hyperbolic time chamber and zoom ahead a year and take all that knowledge with you, but then come back to the present and only play with one finger and one hand on the stick. I bet you could beat a lot of people just because you'd be, a year of extra practice. Two, your mind would be so much crisper. Instead of every hit and every block and every setup going like, oh, what's going on? You'd be like, not this again. And you'd be like, I've got a plan for this. And you could be able to fight your way out of it without hardly any execution at all. I mean, I really do think that it's like that. And I've seen people, like, there's a guy in our local scene named Dakpo. He's a good Luigi player and Zero Suit Samus player. Played back in Brawl 2. But he was beating people with just one hand on the GameCube controller in Smash 4. He had a little strategy he worked out, and he would just do it in one hand, and he took it to the tournament and didn't do too bad. So it's like, he's not like an amazing player like Zero, who seems to be on a step ahead of everyone. But even though he's good in our region and he places highly, the fact that he could handicap himself like that and still do well just means he's using knowledge and sacrificing execution in a way and playing to certain other strengths that he has, and in that way he's demonstrating the flexibility of applied skill in these fighting games. How even though it's a combination of knowledge and other types of skill, even though dexterity is an issue, even though metagames do have to be studied, like, you can do really well by even handicapping yourself or focusing on a particular part of that instead of the whole thing. So in a lot of ways there's a lot of excuses going around. In a lot of ways, people don't realize how hard it is to teach some of this stuff, and how many different ways there are to, like, waste your time going down the wrong end. Learning Street Fighter 4 combos, like, I was never good at Street Fighter 4, and I practiced some of the training mode stuff. I never felt like I had a controller that was meant for the game. I didn't like the PlayStation controller. I didn't like the way I had to hold it to play. I didn't have an arcade stick. I like arcade stick layouts, but I never got one, so I just never felt like I could play that game. And I own Street Fighter 5. It's pretty much the same, so, I'm not really playing it much. But just little things like, oh, did you plug in your controller the right way? Are you holding the control stick the right way? Are you practicing it like this in the training mode? Do you know how to use training mode? Do you know how to do the settings right? Do you know what you're looking for? Like, pros hit the ground running with that kind of stuff because they've cut their teeth on that before, but new players, sometimes they have no idea how long they have to just either experiment, ask questions, or cut their teeth on something before they can get to that level. And then they're constantly comparing themselves to those players when they should probably compare themselves to people of their own skill level, which may not be hard to do, seeing how they don't really understand their own skill level anyway. But I think a lot of people see what the pros can do, or what good players can do, and they think like, well, that's ridiculous for you to expect me to do that. Well, maybe no one does expect you to do that, but the fact that there is a skill gap isn't necessarily an indication of where you should be at any given point in your progression of understanding this game. And they're like, well, I can't compete if I can't even do that basic stuff. Well, you can't compete because of a lot of reasons. And even though execution may be the one that's most in your face, and even though you may think you're so smart or you understand the game and your fingers are holding you back, that's just not the case. If you were really that knowledgeable about the game, like I'm saying, your fingers wouldn't hold you back. You'd have such a deep knowledge of all the setups, all the frame traps, all the moves, every single thing that you should be able to do well even with one hand, so to speak. So the reason you're bad is because you're bad. The reason that you're also bad is because this game's really hard, and it's and if you keep measuring your progress by a moving milestone, you're gonna get discouraged, as a lot of people do. But we'll hear from a lot of other players this week about all this stuff. Another article that Patrick Miller wrote right here that I really enjoyed was 17 mold-breaking fighting games that all developers should study, and has a lot of examples of things that old games and games I've never heard of did when they came out, and why it was different and why it was neat. Pretty cool stuff. So that was a great read. Great read. Learned a lot of things. Put a lot of these into the game breakdown so that when you search for fighting games, you'll be able to see cool stuff too, as you're searching for everything else. But let's try to find another article. Let me just type fighting and hit enter. We'll let that read. Search for a second. Practicing some peach combos right here. So yeah, Unless Senpai says high execution barriers aren't needed to make a game compelling and deep. But yes, if it's there, it's there. So that's so interesting. So okay, that's an interesting point. And let's take a look at boop. Let's take a look at this chart, right? So you say high execution is not necessary to make a game compelling or deep. Well, to make a game compelling in any general sense, I generally say that all you have to do is stick in anything that somebody finds interesting and the game's compelling. And we have a wide range of games and game-like things in our industry, so like that's already a confirmed, right? You can just shove music into something, some weird visuals, whatever. It doesn't even matter if other parts of the game are necessarily severely lacking or glitchy or broken or whatever. Give enough people what they want in a way, and you'll find people that find it compelling, or people that look past the jank, right? So like, correct. And then you say you also don't need high execution to make a game deep. Well, of course, we have strategy games and turn-based games and lots of different kinds of games, from simple to complex, competitive, esports worthy to maybe you'll put a few tries into it with your friends and realize it's broken kinds of games. But the level of depth varies, and depth is pretty much something that we derive from right here, from the design space of the game, which is essentially like how do all the pieces work together to make interactive experience, and what is the nature of that interactive experience. So that's also true. You don't need high execution to both make a game compelling or deep. However, here's the tricky part. Fighting games, as we see in the notes, whenever you make something in real time, and you give the player access to mechanics that aren't like super slow, that don't essentially turn the game back into a turn-based game like Monster Hunter, almost. Like you have quick enough moves that makes it feel like real time, like a real fighting game or a real match or a real sport where you have like constant micro actions that affect everything that you do and how you play. As long as you have those two things, which are two components of what makes a fighting game, the execution is probably going to get really high, in my opinion. I mean, it's just kind of like the way fighting games focus on and make relevant super minute changes of timing in terms of strategic value. Like I said before, the difference between putting one frame of a gap in between two moves you're going to do can be this like huge revolutionary effective strategy, or just like you mashing a button, and like the difference there could be everything. So if that's the kind of scale we're talking about, then you don't have to have circle pretzel motions on the left stick, you don't have to have multi-button holds or anything. But if your fighting game is just simply made out of real-time parts and you hit buttons to make things happen, you're creating a emergent landscape where super precise timing is rewarded, and your understanding of that timing is also rewarded. So though people complain about pretzel motions and dragon punches, I'm just playing Smash Brothers here. This game is crazy. Let me show you some of the stuff I'm talking about. Okay, so Smash Brothers, you're like, oh look, Mario moves. You know, we went over a little bit of this earlier on the stream, but like more stuff. There's always more stuff to go on too. So this game looks simple. People are like, oh, finally a simple game. You hit button and button does stuff. I love this game. Look how simple it is. Smash Brothers is so much more complex than Street Fighter, because it's sort of the base level it's fairly simple, but then the upper level is really difficult to both execute and to discern as you play. So like Street Fighter is a game where your characters are bigger on the screen, you can see them easier, your moves have a lot of hit pause, right? If you hit something, the game freezes quite a lot, and Sakurai made Ryu in this game have a similar kind of hit pause, but still not as much as it is in the original Street Fighter 2. And one thing that hit pause does in your fighting game is if you're hitting lots of buttons, like here I come, I'm gonna hit some buttons, that extra pause gives you extra time to react and time your next button so everything comes out clearly. And in Smash Brothers, like look how little hit pause there is on this Peach when I neutral air. You see that? That's probably like 1 or 2 frames of hit pause, right? Like that tiny little, and I'm gonna super slow mo it. Okay, super slow mo. Neutral air. 1, 2, 3. Like you see the jiggle. 1, 2, 3 is like 3 frames or whatever, maybe 6, maybe 3 of hit pause for this move. It's not a strong move, so it doesn't get a lot of hit pause, but that means when I'm trying to play efficiently and I go after Peach like this, and I want to do something if that hits, like follow it up. But if I want to stay safe, if it doesn't, like I don't have hardly any time to react to a miss or a hit, especially if she like spot dodges or tries to attack me at the last second or whatever. So like I'm on the threshold of my reactions and trying to clean up my inputs to get the good stuff to happen. Otherwise, I could be countered pretty easily, and that's already like a simple thing that makes it hard to both see and react to. Moves in this game don't cancel into each other. So in Street Fighter, if you want to do like a move into a move into a move, it helps that some of the moves cancel into each other. So you can just be like boom boom, and then the cancel kind of resets your timing calibration. So even if you were a little bit off before, that cancel makes it to where when the next move hits, you're like, okay, now I'm set on my timer. So then they can do stuff like, you know, move, cancel, cancel, move, cancel, cancel, and it helps them keep time. Smash Bros, we don't have stuff like that. All of our stuff is just pretty straightforward and less hit stops, so we kind of have to feel everything out and kind of almost do a lot more guesswork and a lot more manual timing and dexterity to keep going. Oh yeah, input complexity. So that's part of what makes being precise in Smash Brothers difficult. But then you have, you know, full analog movement, right, with the left stick, which means like depending on how softly you press it, you're gonna get all these different sort of spatial results. So it's not just like thinking about full walk forward, block, walk, block. It's like all the degrees in between and all these flailing hitboxes that change. Like a backwards jump in Smash, like this, curls my body up, which allows me to dodge better than just this, where my body splays out like upside down. And you can use that tiny change in animation to your advantage, or you can get hit by it and ignore it. The fact that moves like Mario's up B, where you can angle it forward like almost 45 degrees or angle it almost straight up, depending on how quickly you change your stick input after inputting, that is intense. Like, so you think, oh, just hold up B and you do it. Yeah, sure, it works if you tap it like a normal person, but if you want some really accurate results, not only are you gonna have to hit a B and change the angle, but you can change it to all these different in-between angles. Like, look how different some of these are. And then what if you want to turn around with your up B because you're facing backwards, where you can do a turnaround up B perfect straighten? That is like a dragon punch motion in Street Fighter, but this is even harder because in Street Fighter you can buffer the dragon motion and then hit the buttons and like cancel into it, and it's like the same timing, and you know, maybe it's just as hard, maybe it's easier. But then with Smash Brothers, here's another thing. This game is super dynamic in terms of when you can use moves and where. So I'm in the air and I'm like jumping around and I'm holding forward and backwards, but let's say I want to hit Peach and do a straight up B. I just tried to do a straight up B right there, like this, but because I hit Peach, that extra hit pause caused me to turn around on accident, just because that extra hit pause says, wait, you're still, so only in the very first part of the move, I'll show you, only in the very first part of Mario's up B like this, can you input the opposite direction and turn around before he leaps up into the air. But this timing window, I'll show you. Oops. This timing window is based on how far along you are in the move, not the universal game time. So if I start it here and I hold the opposite direction, oops, he flips around. And that's based on how far Mario is in on the animation. But whenever you hit any target, he freezes slightly with the animation, which changes the input that I have to do. Like this. See this extra freeze? And I'm gonna hit right now. Still enough time to turn around because I was frozen on Peach's body. Like, if you want to talk about getting really precise with stuff, even though the inputs look super straightforward in Smash, and they are, like the dynamic gameplay, just the different hitboxes, the different spatial relationships, and tiny little things like hitting outstretched limbs under idle animation. Like, let's see if Peach does it. If she stretches her arms out when she's tired, I think she'll get hit by this. She moved her hand straight up. Oh yeah, right there. She looked behind her and then extended her arm forward and she got kicked. And now most players aren't just gonna stand there and have their idle animations take effect like that. But it actually affects every single attack, every single move, every single possibility in the game. You wanna know what else would make Smash complicated? Moves are much more complex in Smash than they are in Street Fighter. Just the ability to do air moves and land halfway through them and not cancel automatically, but have landing lag. But sometimes you can do it to where you have zero landing lag, like this. If you do it early enough and you hit your auto cancel window, and then your moves have a sour spot like that, which keeps them low. But if I hit her with the sweet spot, it hits her much farther. That means even though I want to do a certain move, either sour or sweet, if they jump up into the zone or move away out of the zone, just with idle animations, right? Oh, that was supposed to be a sweet spot, but it turned into a sour spot. All this stuff is super detailed, and it happens within a blink of an eye, and it changes which moves you should do or want to do, or your follow-ups. And it makes Smash sort of, even though it looks simple, this game's incredibly hard to play precisely. It's super loose. Like, well, that'll be something that we'll get to later in the week as far as like execution and accessibility. But in a lot of ways, I think people say, "Oh, Smash Bros. It's an accessible fighter," and I'm like, so is Street Fighter. Just because you see super fancy combos and you think you should do them doesn't make the basic buttons in Street Fighter, like a sweep or a jab or whatever, pretty basic. Just like in Smash Brothers, hold down, hit a button. That's a sweep. Hold down, hit a different button. That's a special. Hold down, hit two buttons, and have AB smash, or smash it, or use C-stick. Like, that's pretty straightforward, and that's the same with Street Fighter. Now, just because Street Fighter has a whole bunch of other stuff that cool people do to make themselves play better, it's the same with Smash Brothers. And as far as I'm concerned, the accessibility of the game is half of how you market it and how you approach it, right? So people see this and like, hey, in Street Fighter, a special move like a fireball took a whole quarter motion to do, but this I can just hit a button. Well, that means this is kind of like pressing a normal button in Street Fighter. And even though a fireball comes out, which is great, the more complicated stuff like this, a wave bounce fireball and a B reverse fireball and a fireball that you pull back halfway through, like, it's getting more and more complicated as I'm finding more and more ways to use this thing. Or a wall bounce, a wall kick fireball like this. Like, it gets complicated because of the fact that you're adding in a simple move and trying to do other things simultaneously. Street Fighter is a very digital game, right? You hit a button, and like as you're hitting that button, that's all that's happening. But in Smash, I can hit a button and hold back. I can hit a button and yeah, like edge cancel, which will change the nature of the next button I need to hit if I get an appropriate edge cancel, right? Like right here, this air dodge, hit a button, have landing lag. But if I slip off the edge, I have no landing lag. And that could be a dynamic thing because of moving platforms or whatever. Or just the fact that other bodies push into other bodies can create some dynamic effects where it cancels you in unique ways. So like, hitting a button in Smash Brothers, lots of different things can happen after the fact. And Smash Brothers has defensive DI. So as you're hitting a button, you could be like, you know what? If Peach hits me, I want to also be I'm gonna punch in the wrong direction. I'm gonna smash the iron up. So if that turnip hits me, I'm gonna go up a little bit more. So at any given point, your inputs could be accounting for like 2 or 3 extra things and doing multiple things simultaneously, just to stay relevant and scaling. And I'm not talking about like crazy high level defensive stuff. I'm just saying general stuff. You want to be DIing a little bit when you throw out certain moves, and you want to be moving and aiming using your full analog control, because that's what gets you. That's how you play Smash Bros. It gets complicated. Oh, don't you hit me, Peach. There's a lot more things in Smash 4 that make this game, I think, too complicated to get a lot of precise results out of. And I think I'm going to make some claims and try to do some research, but the way that the current metagame is shaping up is because of a lacking of a few major things, one of them being a proper way to train. Training mode in this game is inadequate, again, for another generation. I mean, this game is way too dynamic, way too fluid to not have some better training mode tools just to understand what the heck's going on in the game. And that it's just really hard. I'm sitting here with my brother, and we're game designers, and we dig into code all the time. We understand how programming works. We study so many games, and we're sitting here going like, okay, what can you do in this game? We labbed out tons of stuff. We started a company called One Smash, and we labbed out tons of stuff and tried to share it with everyone with videos and stuff. It's still complicated, and we're still wrapping our minds around all this tech we found. And even though we found a lot of tech, the applications are hard to integrate because of so many other factors, right? The game is really dynamic. The game is just really hard to understand some of these really minute interactions that happen in the blink of an eye. And there's so many things that could go wrong unless you have a really accurate picture in your head of like how the game works. Yeah, it looks so simple, and that's just the nature of these games. Sakurai tends to make his games really complex, right? And there's a lot of things in this game that take a fighting game and make certain parts intuitive. We'll talk about that all later in day 4, this Thursday, about accessibility, and it's accessibility and something else, and difficulty or execution or something like that. But for the most part, it's all about expectations, and it's all about like what people feel like they can get by with, which is really a shifting scale. Smash Bros is so complicated too. Like I'll tell you, this game, I feel like Street Fighter has the 2 main ways to play. Like you're either jumping at your person and like attacking them like that, you know, maybe zoning them from afar because you have the range, or you're playing footsies and you're close and trying to get your stuff going. Like that's all there is to Street Fighter. And mostly the jumping, people can anti-air and stuff, so you're really just playing footsies a lot just so you can maybe get a jump in. Smash Bros has, I believe, 6 different domains. You know, and because in Smash Bros you're not restricted with your movement in any direction, you can just as quickly run towards your opponent like this, or run away from your opponent like that. So that's how do you pin someone down when in Street Fighter, when they hold back and you attack at them, they block and they walk back slowly, but they walk forward more quickly, which encourages people to, you know, walk at each other and pin them down and chase them down. Smash Bros, you can't chase fast characters like Sonic. They're just gone. They just run and jump and all this stuff. You can chase them down. It's just so much more complicated. So in Smash, you know, you have air to air, which because of the double jump and multi-jump characters, and the fact that people get hit up so high and air dodging, air to air is its own sort of unique battlefield combat zone. You have air to ground, which a lot of people try to do, like, you know, short hop all over the place, just constantly jumping, air to ground, air to ground, air to ground. I love air to ground, and that happens a lot. Then you have ground to ground, which is a lot rarer in Smash Bros, but it still happens. Where 2 people are on the ground, they're like, okay, maybe I'm gonna get a dash grab, maybe I'm gonna spot dodge. Ground to ground's another one, and then you have. I almost linked that. Can I link a neutral air to S smash? But I love that combo. I love that one. Then there's edge guarding, right? Which includes going deep off stage like this and fighting people and then like getting back. Oops. What happened? My computer went on to sleep on me, which is weird. Edge guarding, which also includes fighting people on the ledge, and then there's one more style of play, which is evasive, where if your opponent just runs away and rolls all the time, like that's just, you have to have a specific plan in mind to beat that, and it's super annoying because rolls are annoying, and air dodging all the time, just running away and trying to time you out, like. So there's like 6 different hold, and I call these hold domains because you can almost play exclusively to it, or avoid one domain and just stick with the others almost entirely. So like if you don't want to engage anyone on the ground, you can just jump all the time. Jumping, and then you never have to fight them, and they never have to come and engage you on the ground because they're either always jumping at you or running away and throwing stuff at you and then going to the edge like this and then doop, dying. So even if you're really good at yeah, it takes a while to get used to any game, I think. And I think a lot of people don't realize how hard everything is in the world. But then they think, oh, video games are supposed to be accessible because I purchased $60 for this. Like, no, I don't understand. Like, parts of it are accessible, and then from there, it's how good your coaches are, how good your community is, how dedicated you are. But you're right, like, it's just so hard to get to the bottom of a lot of this stuff, and that's what we're going to see in this week when we take a look at what other people are saying and the excuses they make, or the not excuses. I don't want to, paint it all in a negative light. I think everything that we'll go over has a lot of merit to it. But Smash is complicated, so whenever you're practicing for Smash, if you specialize in ground to ground and they just jump all the time, you're out of luck. If you specialize in edge guarding and they just stand in the middle of the stage all the time and recover like way over your head, you're out of luck. And each of these domains feeds into each other in different ways, and it can be really hard because all the characters are shaped differently and are weight differently and move differently and fall out of the air differently and combo differently, and everything is different. This game is so complicated, it's ridiculous. Street Fighter, they mostly have standardized hitboxes, and every time you hit a body, it's almost nearly guaranteed to be the same combo for everybody. So you look deep within yourself and you're like, now that I got my first hit, boom, I'm gonna do whatever I practice. But in Smash, everything is different, and then they can DI it, and it's just such a crazy game. This game, in a lot of ways, I think some of the game is designed to discourage playing it like Street Fighter. We're very precise and like doing the same combo over and over again. But then there's drawbacks to certain ways Smash is designed, but we'll consider a lot of that later. For now, we're just still talking about what a fighting game is and some of the common things that pop up. Oh, hey, we got Telos and Bleach and Jonathan in the chat too. That's cool. They like being quiet. So yeah, Smash is crazy, and I liked it how Patrick Miller is a real Brazilian. What do you say, Brazilian mixed martial artist or Brazilian martial artist? Practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I don't hear enough people likening fighting games to other disciplines or other activities like sports or even other martial art disciplines, and I think that's sad. Oh yeah, keep lurking. Do what you gotta do, tell us. And I think that's sad because I just don't know what their expectations are. I mean, if you just replace in their sentences the words piano or violin, it's just a common test I tell people to do when they think they're making quote-unquote reasonable claims about game design. Just replace the word you said with piano, violin, or like classical music composition. Like, if they're talking about a game or whatever, you can replace it with that and see if what they say makes any sense. And some people are like, I just don't feel like this piece of sheet music should be this complex. Like, would you ever say that about a piece of classical sheet music, right? Would you ever walk up to Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, or anybody and be like, you know what? This is unnecessary and arbitrarily hard, and this is garbage, and I won't put up with this. And you're like, well, no, you wouldn't say that. That'd be rude. But then I think the reason violins are for scrubs, piano master race, I think the reason is because people just assume a lot about well-established art forms. And whether or not they know a lot about it or not, like, who cares? But in general, like, we assume that they've either passed the test or whatever, or they're legitimate just because the culture at large thinks they're legitimate, which is kind of like a self-feeding circle. But, piano sheet music is just like whatever that dude or dudette wanted to do. And sometimes this music is incredibly difficult, and I've been working on some Chopin pieces for years and years and years. I don't play piano nearly as much as I did in high school and college, but I still work on pieces, and I occasionally go to a amateur piano group in Dallas, and I play. Jeez. And I listen to what piano teachers say on YouTube about some of these songs, and they're like, you're going to be practicing these passages slowly, like 4, 5, 6 times slowly than the final performance speed for not hours, not days, not weeks, maybe months, but probably somewhere close to a year in order to get it like, perfecto. I was like, oh my goodness. If somebody told me that a combo I was practicing it's going to take me a year of practice, would I complain? Would I find another game to play? Like, I don't know, but so hopefully nothing in video games is that hard. Yeah, let me see if I already uploaded it, Lesson Pi. I think that's the first video that I found your channel. Let me check that out. Beep that one. Let me click back over here. I'm gonna type in less than. There's some stuff that's that hard in video. Yeah, like you imagine that pushing any game to the limit, like toss level limits, would and probably should require a year's worth of practice. Like that Monkey Ball speedrunner from Awesome Games Done Quick said he played that game for 4,000 hours or something like that, 2,000, 4,000 hours. And I played Smash 4 currently for about 1,400 hours, 1,300 hours. So that's about a year and a half since it came out, which means that's only been, let's say, 450, 500 days. I played like 2 hours a day of Smash Bros. Every day for the past year and a half. And still learning a ton, like about every single move. I'm still bad. Like, so to hear that Monkey Ball guy just played Monkey Ball for 4,000 hours to get that speed run down, I could totally see that, because when I was playing Monkey Ball and trying to get some of that stuff down, go ahead, Less Than Pi, drop that link in the chat, because I can't find it. Learning exactly one BNB in Skullgirls. Oh, you mean like being able to do Sako combos like Sako can? You're like, what are you doing, Sako? It's like one-handed. Check this out. One frame links. La, 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 la. Cool.
As I'm called, or as I'm known on the interwebs, Less Than 3, and this is the 5th episode of the Less Than Pi art show. The only art show on YouTube that is not about art. Probably not true. Today I'm drawing Toadstool Tech Beach. As usual, you guys can hit me up in the comments if you have any questions about the art or what I'm doing. If you go to my blog, I have more detailed, in-depth analysis, I guess, of what I'm doing. But today I'm going to be talking about depth versus complexity in Super Smash Bros. 4. Smash Bros. 4, whatever you do. First thing I want to do is get into a few definitions. In games, I define depth as the number of meaningful choices you have in any given situation. Just to clarify, that means if there's one optimal choice, but there's a whole bunch of choices, then there isn't much depth there. Depth is amazing. Depth is really cool. In fighting games, specifically, I define complexity as what you need to do to perform an action. So, do you have to push one button to grab or 2 buttons to grab? Do you need to do a whole bunch of things in a sequence to perform your one action to get to your end goal? You know, like a long string of buttons to perform a combo, for example. Complexity can be cool, and I'll get into that a little bit more. So the first thing I really want to do is congratulate Sakurai on creating the deepest, least complex fighting game pretty much ever. 4 buttons to push. There's an attack button, special button, shield button, and we'll count jump and grab too, so 5 buttons, and an analog stick. And through those very few things, you have access to a whole plethora of moves. And then even within those, you have very intuitive variations of moves. So like angled tilts, angled smashes, angled specials, smash specials, tilt specials, stuff like that. It's really you have a lot of meaningful options to choose from there. It's a very incomplex play method. If you compare that to something like Street Fighter 4, it's a deep game, but it's very complex, right? There are 3 punch buttons, 3 kick buttons, press 2 buttons to grab, 2 buttons to focus attack. Each special has a different input: fireball motion, Shoryuken motion, backwards, fireball, charges, etc. You also have a different button you can push for each special. You can do 2 buttons for a special. There are long combo strings that don't leave a lot of room for creativity or adaptability. Generally, there's one best combo from one starter in every matchup. Essentially, that's what it boils down to. In Smash, for example, shielding is a deep option. It's a meaningful trade-off compared to not shielding. Your shield gets weaker over time. The more you shield, it covers less of your body. You have the risk of your shield breaking. In Street Fighter, blocking is not a deep option at all. You have high and low blocking, but there's no real disadvantage to either one. You just can't move forward on the same frame that you expect to block. So, does that mean, am I trying to say complexity is bad? No, that's not what I'm saying. Complexity is great. There's a certain draw for complexity, but complexity does limit access to your game. There are a lot of people that don't want to dive into the complexity to get to the depth of the game. If you compare Street Fighter to Smash, you have a much steeper climb until you can reach the depth of the game. I believe Smash's accessibility has done far more to keep it a relevant growing title for all 3 of its games. I've seen a lot of people confusing complexity for depth when it comes to Smash 4. Making a game faster doesn't make it deeper. The options available don't change with the game speed alone. Having combos can, but don't always make the game deeper. Advanced techniques, movement options, they don't make the game deep. But I think a few of these concepts can be a little tricky to understand, so let's try and unravel. I think one of the biggest draws to Smash in general is the combo system, particularly once we got DI, or directional influence involved. Even while being attacked, the player has control over his launch trajectory, and their opponent, while still having an advantage, has to react and adapt to how his opponent chooses to DI. In top level melee, however, there's usually a best way to DI so that your opponent can't follow up, or you use attacks to guarantee your opponent can't use DI to escape your combos. When you have a best option, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't much depth there. Brawl changed that formula up a little bit. It kept DI, but it took away a lot of hit stun. Oftentimes there would be just enough hit stun so that a player could air dodge right before a follow-up would connect, or use a special move to outright beat any combo attempt. But the best option is not to always evade the follow-up. If you air dodge or throw out an attack but your opponent expects it, it puts you at risk for a larger punish. As a Brawl Sheik main, and a darn good one, if I do say so myself, baiting reaction in between my combos, or strings as we call them in Brawl, was my bread and butter. It really separated me from many of the other Sheiks, and it kept me relevant against vastly superior characters like Meta Knight or Snake or Marth, played by some of the strongest players in the country. I'm from, Central Florida, so you know how that goes. Do advanced techniques and movement options make the game deeper? Well, it can if it provides options with meaningful trade-offs. L-canceling does not add depth to the game. It adds complexity and raises the skill curve, but L-canceling is always 100% the most optimal choice. There's absolutely no meaningful trade-off involved. For example, if L-canceling halved your landing lag, but force you to spot dodge or roll immediately after. That would add depth. Am I baiting a shield here? Am I unsure and I want to play it safe, so I'll roll back? Am I forcing myself on you and expecting you to respect my options? Something like that would add meaningful choice, and through it, depth to a mechanic like L canceling. Advanced techniques like wave dashing, on the other hand, give players more meaningful options out of shield. They trade that invulnerability of dodges and spot dodges for quicker mobility options without that advantage. So, I mean, advanced techniques can provide depth, but they don't always have to. So you have to be a little wary if depth is your main goal. If we look at dash dancing, it gives players huge amounts of freedom in how they can move, but it completely eliminates the need to walk. Because you can pivot smash or wave dash or crouch cancel your run, there are really never any situations where you feel like walking is a good option. It's just a slower version of dashing. Removing dash dancing gives much more room for counterplay for your opponent and forces you to make more meaningful decisions on how you want to disengage or approach. When I look at these pre-release builds of Smash 4, I see a plethora, I love that word, of intuitive, meaningful options with low complexity. There's a lot of commitment in the options available, but through it, we are able to access much more depth. I don't think the goal is to alienate the hardcore fan base, but instead to create a deeper experience that's easier to access for new players. As a competitive community, we need those new players in order to grow. I believe Smash 4 will do a better job of finding out who consistently picks better options as opposed to who can consistently perform the most optimal ones. I know that won't be everyone's cup of tea, but I think with the new games, that's the right direction to go, honestly. I believe that easy to grasp depth will make the game fun to watch and play for a very wide pool of people. But hey, what do I know? Agree, disagree, hit me up in the comments below. Do you really want to get involved in the Smash community? Make an account on smashboards.com and check out the thread I made for this video. The link's in the description. As always, guys, God bless. Be safe. I'll see you next week.
Cool, thanks for the video, Lesson Pi. You guys were already starting to talk about some stuff in the chat, but continue to talk. Let's see, dash dancer requires players to stay within the range where they cannot crouch cancel in order to have the greatest freedom of movement. Well, that's like saying that throw breaking in traditional fighting games is always the best option, so you should always do it, which is true, but you can't always do it because it's a matter of reading the situation and reacting. Yeah, there's a lot of I don't know if there's any point in trying to look at any one element in a game and talk about if it makes it the game deeper or not deeper, right? Because the game is a complex result of so many other elements. It probably would be a lot more beneficial to just be like, this thing exists, here's how I think it affects things, and maybe here's what I think, or here's what I'm afraid of, or whatever. To basically go from a microscopic view and being like, this is one cell, so the whole organism must be like this. It would be quite a jump, right? That's kind of like the complexity that we're talking about, like looking at one tiny cell or one specific organ is not enough to determine so many other facets about the composite whole. But yeah, it's hard, it's tricky. Like what Wager is saying in the chat, like every single thing is, considering every option that either changed or didn't change, is so much more complicated when you try to, the higher you try to sort of draw your conclusion. So you can say on a low level, like, oh, it looks like this is out, so this is this, and that's true, but then it's a cascading effect, right? If one thing is changed, that may allow something else, but that may give room for something else, which may, open a floodgate of other things or shut down something. Like, who knows? It's hard to say. I mean, the question is as complex as the game is, right? Because you're really talking about the whole game. But yeah, Yeah, I've heard so many arguments about Street Fighter combos and melee L canceling and all this stuff, right? And and a lot of them just boil down to, well, it's not necessary, and like I think that's not the point of. It's not the strongest argument they can make, and it's not the point of making games. I want to make a system where everything is necessary. Like by what degree? Like we're playing with imaginary characters from the Nintendo universe. Like none of this is necessary. This whole game doesn't need to exist, and nothing doesn't. There's no element that necessarily needs to be like it is, right? So you have to just consider like, well, what are the pros and cons, and maybe you use that as a launching board to talk about other things you'd like to see. Yeah, in the presence of some optimal things to do in a fighting game it's not a bad thing, right? Especially when sometimes going for the optimal can have a rubber banding effect, because you make yourself more predictable in some ways, especially for a game like Smash that isn't as lock solid with its combos as Street Fighter in a lot of ways. Yeah, I think we could always take a dip into David Sirlin. Let me type that in. David Sirlin, big on fighting games. Makes board games and card games, but has its roots in Street Fighter. Has written a lot on Street Fighter. Worked on a HD remix of Street Fighter Super Turbo back in the day. Has a lot of opinions on execution, right? But ultimately, I think what you'll hear and see the more you listen to Sirlin is that he comes from a very specific mindset about the necessity of execution in fighting games, and he obviously really likes the strategic elements in fighting games, so he'll play that up in almost every design conversation that he ever engages in with Street Fighter. So like, how can we minimize things that players do all the time? Let's get rid of all unnecessary button presses and let's say 100% feed into some kind of interesting choice, which is kind of what Lesson Pi was arguing, like how L canceling isn't a meaningful choice, so it doesn't add depth. You're like, not everything in your system needs to directly add depth to the system by way of being a meaningful choice with pros and cons for that one individual choice. And like Wager said, throw teching in games, you should probably do it every time, but like the reason you can't, in you trying to anticipate it, has other pros and cons to other ways that the game works that aren't so like hard coded in its system. And with L canceling, yeah, you do it all the time. It's pretty ubiquitous, but just because I think a lot of people see it as an advanced technique that's unnecessary if you could just have it done automatically, but there's a lot of sort of basic things you do in these games that you just do as a matter of course because there's no other way to do them. Kind of like moving and stuff, moving, shielding, and all that. You kind of push that all the time in certain situations, and you're constantly inputting things anyway. So it's not like L canceling is too dissimilar from all these other things you're doing, and in different ways that you can mess up. Like if you mess up a dash turnaround, right? If your character goes into a skid turnaround, you're like, well, I didn't want to do that. Why don't you just take that out? Because I don't want that negative thing to happen, and I don't want to focus on doing clean inputs all the time to make my character not skid turn around. You're like, yeah, that's a thing to consider, but it's in the game, so clean up your inputs and play the game. Oh wow. Hyakunen Hayai ni Hyakunen Hayai, 200 years early, too early for Wager. I think all the multiplayer games should exclusively test contested skill, or he thinks contested skills. So yeah, it's just like little mindset that it's what the perspective he was coming from, and I'm very different. I think there's a lot of engaging and interesting design in non-contested skills, like the way your character moves and how you control them, and like and how that communicates to your opponent when you're playing in movement alone and control of things like that. I like that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I love myself some game feel. I love playing with unique controllers in my games. I love doing lots of stuff like that. And dude, so I guess right now we're talking about controllers. I'll change it to blue. Yeah, and a lot of people sort of I don't know, like when I play real life sports and activities, doing anything in real life like piano, violin, basketball, whatever, it's super complicated. You're talking about oftentimes your whole body, coordinating muscles across your whole body. Certainly for basketball, you know, for piano too, even though it may not seem like it, less so for violin, but it's a big deal to coordinate all these muscle groups. And these instruments are just super unforgiving and refined. Like every breath you take, every twitch, like every waver of your finger can affect the sound, or does affect the sound. And that's like a very sort of precise world to enter in and try to master, right? So I play these video games. I'm reminded of similar things, right? Oh, just having to approach the game in a certain way and develop techniques and to think about cleaning up inputs. And that's just nothing different for me. So yeah, let's see if we can listen to something Sterling said on fighting games, because I'm kind of interested in hearing what he has to say. Let's see. So he has this podcast here, Character Bands. Oh, he has one on Smash Brothers, so we'll listen to that one. It's probably on the next page. Yeah, Wager and I, we've talked about fighting games all the time. So, like, I've had a lot of these same conversations with him before. Which one did he talk about Smash Brothers? Cooperative games. Let's see. I'm just going to type in Smash and see what I get. Because you need to move that whole distance before you can crouch cancel and get your other options back. Lose your ground. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, so here's an episode called Easy Special Moves, right? And I think he talks about Smash Brothers on that one. Let's see. We discussed Street Fighter 5 trailer and Super Mario 3D World, Smash Brothers 4. Let's listen to Easy Special Moves. I think that'll get us where we want to the fastest.
Support for this podcast comes from the patrons at patreon.com/Sirlin. Hello everybody and welcome to Sirlin on Game Design, episode 12, Easy Special Moves. And today with me is Mr. G Phantom.
Hey Sirlin.
Hey. So let's talk about easy special moves in fighting games, or easy moves in general, what that means.
Okay, cool. Yeah. It's a subject near and dear to my heart.
Well, it's a timely subject also because the Fantasy Strike fighting game, which is in development now, and also the game Rising Thunder by the founders of Evolution, both those games have quote-unquote easy special moves. And so there's a lot of talk about, like, is that a good idea or a bad idea or whatever.
Yes.
And this is going to be a little different of an episode than I think people expect, because my point here isn't even to convince people that easy special moves are a good idea. I mean, I do think that, but I think we can cover more than that. What I would like to do is just have a conversation with you about like, why should we like easy special moves and why should we not? And we'll give our opinions, and that's going to be an easy conversation for us to have, and it'll be fast. And the problem is that people out there on the internet who are commenting a lot on this topic, I read so many comments that they're just not able to have this conversation like correctly. Like they're getting like muddled up in like what is
Right.
like what are we even talking about? Like what is an easy special move?
Mm-hmm.
So it's causing statements that it's not that I disagree with their opinions. I mean, maybe I do, but that they're just wrong statements that are confusing the issue.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay,
Yeah,
so let's just have the conversation and show how simple it can be.
Okay, like a normal conversation.
Yeah, like a normal conversation. So hey man, easy special moves. Like, what do you think about that? Like being able to do a move more easily rather than a more difficult command motion.
Well, I think that'd be, really good for new players. Doing hard things when you're new is hard.
Right. What about experts though?
Well, I think experts would benefit as well, since they don't have to worry about these difficult executions, and they can focus on strategies and techniques and playing there against their opponent.
Yeah. So you said focus on strategies. I think this brings up the core point right here, is that we can use these terms contested skill or uncontested skill.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say contested skill, we mean something that you can do something about. So I might want to get the right distance from you to do my move. Mm-hmm. And that's a skill. And you can do something about that because you can control how far you are from me. And we're kind of playing a little tug of war fight over the distance. Mm-hmm. So that's interactive. Then an uncontested skill would be something where you can't do anything about it. Like I've hit you with the first hit of my combo and I'm going to do the rest. And you're just not involved anymore. Like it's like a one player game I'm playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for that moment.
Yeah, for that moment. So like bowling. Bowling is uncontested skills. Like you can't go into the lane and try to deflect the ball or something. And golf is about uncontested skills, whereas basketball would be, well, there are uncontested skills in basketball. Mm-hmm. Taking your free throw or something. But lots of stuff in basketball is contested. You're interacting constantly with the opponents.
Yeah. They literally call a shot that someone is in front of you a contested shot.
Right. See, they know about this.
Right.
Okay, so we've now drawn this distinction. So what of it? Who cares about it? Well, competitive games, I think, this is my opinion now, that contested skills are really interesting. And that's why it's okay to have easy special moves. Mm-hmm. Because the special moves were an uncontested skill, like being able to input the correct command to do the move. This is sort of a one-player thing that didn't have anything to do with interacting with the opponent. And if we can get you past that, then that gets you to the part where you are interacting with the opponent, and that's the interesting part of the game to me. So that's my opinion. I think you are basically saying the same thing, if I read you right.
Yeah, I certainly think the same line about execution and player interaction, and I much prefer dealing with an opponent than dealing with my controls, I guess you could say, like it's a barrier that I'm less interested in.
Yeah. So here's a quote. I don't actually have the exact words in front of me, but a rough quote from Seth Killian about Rising Thunder. So he said that Rising Thunder has easy special moves. It's just a single button press, which it also is in Fantasy Strike. Mm-hmm. And he was saying that this is okay, and look at it through this lens. Like imagine you're watching Daigo, one of the best fighting game players in the world, and you're really impressed with him. Well, are you impressed that he never misses his fireballs? Is that what it's like? Wow, that Daigo man never misses a fireball. Like,
I'm impressed.
No one's ever said that.
I'm impressed that he never
no one
misses
cares
his
about
fireballs. I mean, and he does miss. And when he misses, like, whoa, rare drop from Daigo. And then you're like, that must be such an intense game that even shook the unthraggable Daigo and his concentration. I'm impressed by lots of things. It's funny when people start talking about, like, what you can be impressed by. Like, I'm impressed by everything, by lots of things, especially things I can't do and things I would like to do. It's like, are you impressed that they played that one note on the piano? Yes. It's because that note is not easy to do, especially after playing all those other notes. And even though it's just one note with one finger, I'm still impressed. It's part of the whole thing, right? Yes, I'm impressed.
It's not the interesting part of the game.
Mhm.
The interesting part is that he kind of downloads your brain somehow, gets inside your head, does exactly the right thing. He's put under pressure, and
They do that all the time, right? Like, oh, the interesting part of the game is what I like, right? You're like, yeah, and the other stuff too. I mean, the interesting part of the game is just about every bit of the game working together, including the stuff that you like and the stuff that you don't like. But yeah, that's what I was kind of saying before about how Sterling, I mean, he says it, like, it's his opinion that he likes contested skills, and he thinks that's the most interesting part of the game. I just don't know why so many people find, I don't know why so many people find other parts of the game, they just want to ignore it altogether instead of considering what it is about it that ties into what they like and, you know, where the gaps are, whatever. Like, come on. Come on. But hey, if you absolutely have no respect and appreciation for people getting the job done, you only care that they chose to try to get the job done in the first place, then man, you must live in some kind of world where people do what they say all the time and execution is just a non-factor.
he seems to be more creative. You know, and these clutch
Yes,
moments.
yes, he's very clutch. That's why he's fun to watch.
Yeah, so it's about interesting decisions. That was Seth's point. Now, I actually want to come back to that same quote later in our episode when
Okay.
we've talked about some other terminology.
Sure.
And we could kind of look at, so like right now, that's very much in line with what we've already said. But when we come back and look at that quote a little later, I think we're gonna look at it a little differently. Actually, it's gonna be a surprise.
Oh man. I'm excited. This is an exciting proposition.
Exciting proposition. So we've had this discussion about our opinions on easy special moves, and
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of it, right?
Right, there we go. Let's wrap it up. I think this is gonna be a great episode.
no. Okay, I just remembered one more point I wanted to make. About this.
Okay, here we go.
So for years, I've had the same conversation with you. And I've kind of say what I just said to you. And then some people come back and they disagree. And they say, no, that's all wrong. And it's really important to have uncontested skills. Or I mean, maybe they don't say it like that. But
Sure. But they talk about, like, it's important to have difficult execution or something, right? Like,
yeah, because it's dumbing the game down for casuals, right?
yes.
Yeah. That's really the central phrase of this whole topic is whether easy special moves dumb the game down for casuals or not.
Mm-hmm.
Let's come back to that. But that's an
Okay.
important phrase.
All
so
right.
so anyway, I'm talking to all these people who many of whom have the opinion that the uncontested skills are very important, that having a lot of difficult combos are important, that having moves that are difficult to execute is important.
Mm-hmm.
And many times I've pushed them on that and said, like, can you explain where that's coming from? Because at first glance, it just doesn't seem to be interesting.
Yeah.
These are competitive games, and the whole reason they shine is like what Seth just said in that
Mhm.
quote, is that we care about Daigo's decisions. That's what's really exciting.
Yeah.
So why do you want this other stuff? And so many times I've gotten back just terrible answers. Okay, and then one time I got back an answer that really, I thought it was like enlightening to me.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I don't know if I've told you about this before. It was from Eric Williams, who is a designer on God of War.
Okay.
And I was, saying the stuff that I normally say, and he very politely disagreed and said that he really liked a bunch of difficult stuff in fighting games. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really surprising. Like, I wouldn't expect you to say that. Also, God of War is, like, super easy to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so he just explained, like, how interesting combos are to him.
Mm-hmm.
And watching people do them and learning to do them. So.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, yes, I get it, but like playing DDR can be interesting. Or playing a rhythm game, like a single player game, can be interesting. And that's got nothing to do with the opponent, and so that makes more sense in these other genres. Like, why do you want that in this genre?
Mm-hmm.
And I still wasn't quite feeling the answer.
Sure.
Then I said, okay, let me put it a different way, which I've used this analogy a million times. That imagine that there's a game where it's all about contested skills, like the decision kind, except you can bake a cake during the game. Okay, and there's a whole new set of skills. Like you have to be good at all the other skills of the game and good at cake baking, and there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
So there's a higher skill ceiling. That's just like an objectively true statement, because you need to know cake baking skills and all the other skills. It's a higher skill ceiling. If we took out the cake baking, we would have lowered the skill ceiling and dumbed the game down for casuals. Right?
Yes.
Then just anybody who doesn't know anything about cakes could like do well at the game.
Yeah. Why would I want to play this game with where people don't have to make cakes? This is insane.
Yeah, watching people bake cakes, it's exciting, it's hype, there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of different kinds of cakes and nuance. And so I said all this and I was like, okay, so I've just explained like a worldview about this cake thing. And how is it different than what you're saying? Okay, now do you know what he said to that? This was the enlightening moment.
Oh man. Did he say like that cake thing sounds awesome or something? I mean, I don't know.
No man, it's deep.
Okay.
You ready? He said this. It's no different.
Oh man.
And suddenly I understood everything.
I see. Okay.
Because it's the most honest answer. He's not representing that it even necessarily makes sense that he wants all this hard execution stuff.
Sure.
He's just saying like, yeah, somebody else out there, maybe they really like baking cakes, and he doesn't like that, but he really likes watching hard combos. He just likes it, and it's got nothing to do with the other part of fighting games.
Right.
Like, that's what he's saying. Like, there's just two things, and he likes both things.
Right. Sure. That makes sense. Right. It's not a
And I thought, well, okay, I guess we disagree, but at least we've stated where we're coming from.
Sure. It's not like this convoluted mental logical gymnastics of like saying it's good for the game, right? It's just flat out, no, I like it. That's why I want it to be there. Which like you said, it's an honest answer, and that's like a conversation. That's like a ground you can have, right? It's like, okay, well, at least we're being honest.
Yeah, and then to give an inch, from my side, when you watch a tournament and there's like a big combo, it can be super exciting. It can be as a spectator.
Yeah.
That's different from like, should it be in the game and should you have to learn that to be able to actually play the fun part of the game?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
But I can see that it can be exciting. Okay, so we've had the conversation in two ways, I guess, like giving our opinion and then trying to illustrate how someone could disagree. But with most of the episode here, I just wanted to talk about what are we even talking about? Like not even about whose opinion is right or something. Just what does easy special moves really mean? When people are saying this on a forum, what are they talking about? And when somebody says, I've heard that some certain game has easy special moves, and that means it's dumbed down for casuals. What is wrong with that statement? I think there's multiple things wrong that we haven't even began to cover, like the second thing. I hope we've touched on one reason a reason why that's not a great opinion, but there's, I think, something even factually wrong about it. Okay, so here's my...
if Serlin really wanted to end his podcasts on such strong statements of design, with such positive examples that other people can learn from and listen to and whatever, draw from years to come, it would be good if he drew in some other real voices instead of just like talking about all these conversations he supposedly had and kind of talking about people instead of talking with or to people. But it's easy to just to stay inside of your own circle of friends and just have that information cycle around. I hope you guys appreciate some of the approaches we're taking with Dio. I mean, Dio Live in essence is saying whoever is out there talking about the topic of the day, you get listened to, right? And it doesn't really matter good or bad for the most part of what I think you're saying, but the fact that you kind of put something out there, it gives you a chance to respond, people in the chat a chance to listen to you straight up without me having to like edit what you say and make a condensed version. We try to listen to as much as possible, and I think that's pretty important. I mean, if I had my choice, I'd have a lot more people in on this conversation, but we'll see what happens when the DO channel rolls along in the future. Maybe a lot more people will tune in who have actually written on each individual topic and subject, and we'd have more of a conversation. Currently in the chat, looks like Wager and Lesson Pi are talking about zoning characters. Lesson Pi, do you want to jump on Skype or something? I mean, if you can't type, we can find a way to get your voice in there. Yeah, it's an interesting point, Wager. I think, I mean, certainly after the end of our, the Witness week and even Star Fox week, we listened to a lot of different viewpoints on various points of the game. And at the end, I had all the topics that were raised it's sort of like a map. And I was working on a video to try to wrap it all up, and obviously I'm a little behind now. But I think it's important that DL becomes a resource that people can use to hear what's out there, and then also to sort of guide them on how to, swim through all that information and actually reach some conclusions, right? I think a lot of people out there are talking definitively as if they actually engaged in a debate and actually did research and actually listened to each other's sides, but really, it's just a whole bunch of islands from what I can tell. And I don't know how many people are actually qualified out there to say things like, this is what people are saying out there, that's just the person collecting it all. And been spending the last half a year just collecting all this stuff and running data on it. Our data analysis tools are getting more and more sophisticated. One of the newest things that we can do is take every single thing that's said, at least in text form, and then query it for a word, and then query it for words surrounding that word. So we can see, surrounding context and pull quotes instantly from over 18,000 entries, right? And so when I say something like people seem to be saying this, it's really like we've looked at everything that's being said from as many ways we can organize it, and we're trying to steer things in a better direction. Yeah. For me personally, I would much rather have different voices on this channel than to just have another me just talking to myself or just echoing the same sentiments. So like, as much as I can, I'm trying to reach out to different people and get their opinions on it. So yeah, look out for later this week. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff to dip into, to talk about. We'll keep listening to a bit of Sterling's podcast, but I think his best podcast is when he's in his area of expertise, when he's talking almost post-mortem style about games that he's finished. And when he talked about Codex, that podcast was really good to listen to. And still in his own echo chamber of like-minded friends and designers, but still extremely focused. Just a really clear look into what he wanted to do with the game and why he made the decisions he did. So, like, if I were to recommend one, that would be one I would. Get Michael on. Michael, I don't know if Mike exists. That would be something I'll look into later. But yeah, learning is actually really hard, and it's really complex. Listening is very hard, and writing and articulating what you think is very hard. So if you try to make anyone required to do any of those, even one of them, you're going to have some issues. I'm going to try to structure DO to where it's just a lot more easy for people to participate and easy for them to get the information out, instead of just putting so much of the burden on people in the chat and so on and so forth about various things they can do to extend the conversation. Like, I'm really good at taking the conversations to places because, that's just where my mind has been for the past 8-10 years, and I can connect things in games, and I know what's in our database, so I can look up articles and do the search and hopefully model that for you guys. So if you guys are ever curious, you can do the same. But no, not everybody can do that or wants to do that or even cares. So I'm going to try to find some nice middle point. Wager isn't afraid of anything, including a fully charged forward smash. So this combo's not working because Peach is too light. I'm going to try at 90. But I think... I can't get off the ground fast enough. That doesn't combo against Peach. That's annoying. But you know what does combo against Peach? Rising up air into fair into up B. Is it 111? Or is it short hop rising fair into dunk at 90? No, that's too high, so it's gotta be 80. Yeah, another thing is trying to figure out what people find most useful, most interesting. Unlike a lot of people with their games criticism, they have this undercurrent of like, let's help developers make better games. And for the most part, like, it's a neat enough sentiment. Like, hey, let's all share knowledge and get better by talking to each other and talking about things. That's great. But this idea that people can actually help each other without actually like getting in the trenches and teaching them and working hands-on and stuff like that, it's just a really sort of far-fetched idea of like, yes, I thought for like 10 hours about something and now I can help you. Yeah, maybe not. maybe not, but for the most part, you should aim for something less intrusive and just be like, let's just have a decent conversation. I mean, that's my goal. I'm like, let's have a decent and clear enough conversation about one topic at a time. Sonic is a super safe character. So you need to fix your S key to type in this sentence about Sonic. Sonic is a super safe character that, with the combination of his specials and his high move speed, he can really trip you up even without dash dances. Specials. Alright, later, Telos. Thanks for hanging out. Bop, 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 bop. Do I really want to click play on the Serlin?
About it.
Okay.
So imagine this spectrum, and I'm going to divide it into 3 parts. And I'm dividing it. You could argue about like exactly where the lines are of these 3 things, and that's fine. It's kind of not really the point. It's just I'm trying to give some kind of vocabulary so we can know what we're saying. Now, on one end of the spectrum, you have moves. What's a move? A move is like a fierce punch. Like you press the fierce punch button and your character punches. Or like a fireball is a move. You do a quarter circle and press punch and you throw a fireball. Or like you shoot a gun in first-person shooter. Or throw a grenade. Those are moves. Mm-hmm. Or maybe building a Zergling or something in StarCraft. That's like kind of a move in a sense. In a way. Maybe telling the Zergling to attack, that might count as a move. So yeah, that's moves. But farther along part of the spectrum, there's like combos of moves or techniques where it's more than just a move. Okay, so like jump roundhouse, low medium kick fireball. That's not a move. Like no one would call that a move. That's like 3 things together, and it's not just any 3 and not just any timing. You got to do it at a very specific timing to make that work as a combo.
Right.
So yeah, combos of things, but also techniques. Like, okay, I'll pick one from Guilty Gear. With Chip, you could run forward and jump, and you will fly forward through the air. But if you hold down and kick, you will drop straight down, and you won't have forward momentum. Right. Now the down and kick thing, that's a move. It's like an input and a thing happens. That's a move. But a technique is that you can do down plus kick, and then immediately green block, or faultless defense as it's called, and then immediately stop doing that.
Right.
And what happens is you cancel your kick. You do 1 frame of a kick, and then it doesn't even come out, but your character falls straight down. You can do any move you want. That's a technique. It's like a bunch of stuff going on there to make that possible. Or carrot throw. That's one that most fighting game players probably know.
Yes.
So like in a normal fighting game, you hold towards and press a button and you throw somebody, or maybe you press 2 buttons at once and you throw somebody. I really like the 1 button method, but that's not even the point right now. A carrot throw is where it's more complicated than either of those. It's really just like the chip thing, actually. You do a normal move that is some kind of move where your character lunges forward, and then you, like 1 frame later, cancel it into a throw, so you don't even ever see the move, but you just get the forward movement of the normal.
Right, yeah.
So it's like this kind of tricky, finicky thing where you gotta press 3 buttons to throw, but not even all 3 at once, like in a certain timing. So this is a technique to me.
Yes, right.
The technique, okay? And then the third category, I want to put this even farther along the spectrum, is the kind of techniques and combos and so on that quote unquote don't matter. Okay, let me give you an example of that. So like, let's say in Super Turbo Street Fighter or HD Remix, you could pick either one. If you ask someone, are there combos that do 100% damage, then an expert would tell you, yes, there are actually many combos that do 100% damage. And they could show you some of these combos, and they can be like incredibly hard, like super hard. But you also might ask, well, let's say we had a tournament, how many times would we expect to see that combo like in a tournament?
Yeah.
And it would be like, well, 0. It's like, oh, really? 0? Well, what about in 100 tournaments? Oh, still 0.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because it's such a crazy situation that you could ever even do it, that it just like never comes up, and it's totally impractical to ever practice it.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things in this category where there's super hard things that are in a game, but it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, because they're just too hard, like too humanly hard.
It's a total judgment call whether you put something in this third category or not, and people could really be way far off on what should go in there if they weren't familiar with tournaments, because there's things that you might think are hard but are actually common amongst very good players.
Right, yeah.
But I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, like, no, we know. Let's say we know what we're talking about, and there's still. I'm even being a little lenient in what I would put there. Like, if there's a combo that was super hard to do and it did 5% more damage, and you could do it, one in a tournament, it would come up once.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it matters in some sense, like in that it matters more than 0. But I'm saying, like, come on, between you and me, does that really matter? Like, you could win Evolution and never do that tournament. It's totally reasonable.
Oh yeah,
to expect that. So I'm putting things where you can totally reasonably win like the world's biggest tournament and not do it. I'm calling that doesn't matter.
Totally. Yeah, that's like a pretty good way to put it.
Okay, so we have these 3 categories, and they're rough because you could argue, what's a technique, what's a move, and what matters and what doesn't. But you sort of get the gist.
Oh yeah.
So then somebody says, well, I don't like some game because it has easy moves. And then you say, well, why do you not like that? And they'll say, well, because I really value, they won't say it like this, but basically I do like uncontested skills. I like the one player, training mode stuff that's hard to do.
They like the dexterity test.
Yeah, they like the dexterity test, and they hear that there's easy special moves, so there's no dexterity test. That's why they don't like it. That doesn't make any sense. Like, if that's all you know, because if I tell you the game has easy special moves, you don't actually know anything about how hard this game is to play.
Yeah. That doesn't tell you if the game is hard from any other standpoint. It's not all just moves.
Yeah, so much of it is techniques and combos. That's all. Like, the bulk of the game is in this middle section, really.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to think about. Let's think this through. Like, let's say a game's marketing message was, we have easy special moves. So what is their point? Like, why are they saying that? What are they getting at? We've already said it. Just repeat it, I guess. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's so newer players can get into it faster. It's like that's the main feature of easy special moves.
Yeah. So, imagine if you pushed them on that, and you're like, oh, really, game? You have easy moves? Like, what are some examples of the moves? And they say, okay, well, throwing is 2 buttons, and I like the 1 button throws, but whatever. It's 2 buttons, but actually you should never throw with 2 buttons. You should always really do this Kara throw thing with 3 buttons.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And it's like, wait, well, is a game that says they have easy special moves, but then has Kara throws and 100 other things like that.
Roll canceled.
Yeah, like, is that really easy special? It's like deceptive. to say.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
it's
it's like-
implying that the category 2 stuff, or at least not all of it, but some portion of it is going to be easy too. That's what people are thinking. That's why they're saying it.
Yeah.
But and if it's not true, it's like not delivering on the implied promise.
It's like when you get the game, you go through the instruction booklet and it tells you how to do a bunch of things, but they're like really not the real way. Once you graduate into, higher level advanced play, you get to find the real inputs.
Yeah, or another kind of rhetorical way to think about it is like, imagine you had a game.
Yeah, I'm done with that. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up our just pre-look at fighting games, some of the topics that are popping up around fighting games. As Sterling said, the whole execution thing was one thing that came up semi-recently. People talk about that all the time. They talk about combos. They talk about, how to learn fighting games or where the real quote-unquote game is, and so on and so forth. And then they talk about, like, people who actually play fighting games talk about real specific details, like kind of like what was happening in the chat between Less Than Pi and Evilagram or Chris Wager. It's just they get into details. They talk about this and that, pros and cons. They talk about strategies and feel and options and taking away some and trying to make others more focused. And that's just the complex landscape that we are entering in. So hope to see you guys tomorrow. We're going to talk about, unlike what just about everyone has done in this field, just organize a lot of different sort of criteria for understanding the various types of fighting games and encounters, move situation styles, play styles, whatever. Just giving us some handy tools and things that we can easily observe and look at, so we can take a better look at these games and take more accurate data. So we're gonna look at things like footsies. We're gonna look at things like Smash Brothers with Edge Guarding. We're gonna look at how offense and defense plays out and try to draw some pretty interesting, countable conclusions. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. And I'm just gonna keep playing Smash Brothers. And if anybody wants to stay in the chat for a little bit, that's cool. But obviously, I never stop playing Smash Brothers. Ooh, that one connected. Supposed to kill. In a game with easy special moves, you don't get that. You don't get buffering its specials frequently. You don't get a lot of things. How do you stop playing Smash Brothers? And start playing Garo. I can't learn any more games. But let's see. If you want to play Garo tomorrow, if you can make it during the 3 o'clock, that's when we are more flexible. We can try playing it then. Otherwise, we might be able to play it later at night at the 9 p.m. But definitely after we make the criteria, then we can take a look at some games and play some and see how they match up. That sounds like fun, Wager. So yeah, hit me up tomorrow. I gotta go to the gym pretty soon. Ooh. Less Than Pi, let me see those S's. So annoying to kind of move in this game. Supersonic speed. Let me turn up the game audio so I can hear it. No, not that stream audio. Now you guys can hear it. I don't like Sonic at all, by the way. That's sad, because everyone likes Sonic. I don't know, I think it's also kind of weird. Like, fighting games are obviously modeled after, in some form or fashion, real life fighting. With punches and kicks and movement and stuff like that. So I don't know why you would think that just because someone can do something in a fighting game that's not immediately contested, how that it's different from the similar kinds of freedoms that real life fighting has when you are engaged in a fight. Like, you can back up a little bit and you can flex and you can punch a box and you can do push-ups, you can taunt, you can do all kinds of stuff in a real fight. It's not like the other guy necessarily is rushing you down. But looking at it in a different way, like, the same control that you have to engage in the fight is also the same control that you have to not fight, and I think that's super important in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, you give me an ability, and you can make this ability no matter what. When I hit this ability, I'm fighting someone, or you can give me control of my arm, and I will decide when I move this arm what that means. I can move this arm to just jab out into space. I can use this arm to punch at my opponent when they're close. I can use this arm to throw out a taunt or whatever. Like, it's my arm. So, like, that freedom and that scale that you have is part of what makes fighting so interestingly defined. Do you look at so many martial arts movies, and sometimes the characters find ways to use their martial arts outside of a direct fighting context, like Shaolin Soccer, The Legend of the Drunken Master, and Hero, and like so many other films, right? Their martial arts is a way of life. And in a very similar way, when you have that ability extended into a video game, sometimes if you give them a little freedom not to engage, it gives the when, where, and why they do engage that much more of a clear definition of, like, you can use this punch to dodge, you can use this punch to taunt, you can use this punch to just whatever, to throw off your opponent, to, you know, so many things, right? So it's not that necessarily, and that also applies to uncontested skills, right? Like, there are ways to show who you are on the battlefield, which is just as important as showing that you can overcome your opponent's mind or their current mental state or whatever. Like, I'm not here just to crush you. I'm here for me to show what I can do and crush you. Like, I'm not just playing any game. I'm playing the game I like to express myself in, and I'm here to try to win this match. there are a lot of points in real life fights where there are things you can't contest. Like, yeah, it's just such a weird way of thinking. Like every iota of your interactions with the controller must be contested. It's so weird when you like let it breathe, man. Like listen to music. Not every single note has to be like building up for the main melody and like layering it up in this complex way. Sometimes things are transition. Sometimes silence is important. You gotta let it breathe. And the contrast is just as important as defining the main thing as it is sort of an offshoot in and of itself. Super curious to what Keith Bergen and Frank Lance are talking about in terms of execution, but I just think so like here I'll leave you guys with this. If you guys want to check this out, pause you. Smash Brothers. You can pause for a second. So I typed in execution, I typed in my name. I write a lot about it. I wrote a series called Complexity from Simplicity, which was after a series I wrote called Depth from Complexity. And kind of like some of the things we talked about today, just what is depth in and outside of video games? How do we come about it? Why do we? What is its particular relationship to complexities? Is a Keith and Frank thing a live stream or is it a podcast he's recording? But yeah, I wrote this article series and just really talking about if you value sort of the mind, right? Like a lot of people say, I love strategy. I love overcoming my opponent's mind. But like, if you love overcoming your opponent's mind, then you should also appreciate all the different ways that the game system reflects you who you are and your current mental state, right? So, okay, so then we'll get to listen to that podcast later. Hopefully he'll have it up before the week's end. So in this series, I argue that complexity can come from a type of simplicity, and I cite some. I think I cite a TED Talk by Shore, who talked about the grammar of classical music. I talked a little bit about language systems and how the complexity must be born in the language itself, the vocabulary or the grammar, and you can't skip on one or the other. It's got to be either a shared between the two or in one side or the other. I talked about how execution in itself is highly reflective of so many different things about our mental state and who we are, that it's important to key in on that and appreciate it, or you can do that. And it talks about it a lot in this series, but it was a lot of fun. It's kind of a bummer though that there are so few people. I feel like, well, there's a lot of people out there writing about games now that I'm starting to learn by putting them in this database, but I'm also learning how little they actually know about each other and talk to each other. So hopefully, I love that picture. That's so cool. Well, hopefully, cool stuff will happen. Being able to connect them. Cool, guys. I want to pack it down. Thanks for joining. Join us tomorrow for more talk about fighting games and Super Smash Brothers. Come with questions. Share the stream with other Smashers and people who are interested in having an interesting and cool conversation that covers the entire discourse, or as much of it as we can get through this week. I will see you guys next time. Peace.